And remember that the ultimate currency you have, like the one thing that adds your specific brand of value to something is.
What's up, everybody? How's it going? In this video, I paired up with James Cariello. He is an ex-Google senior engineering leader, and I asked him a bunch of questions about his tenure at Google, which was super long, like a decade long, why he left Google, what he's working on now. I think you're all going to really enjoy this video. James is an awesome guy. I actually used to work with him when I was at Google. He was basically my manager's manager, very senior in the company, but really nice, down to earth. And when I recently learned that he left Google, I was like, okay, I gotta ask you some questions and put them on YouTube. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. His new company is hiring, so I'm going to put a bunch of links about his new company in the description and in the comments below. And as always, if you're a software engineer preparing for technical interviews, do check out my company, AlgoExpert. Go to algoexpert.io and use the promo code CLEM, C-L-E-M, for a discount on the platform. Now, enjoy the video. And I guess one last thing, he does use a lot of words and acronyms that you might not be familiar with. So for example, GCP, Google Cloud Platform, PubSub, IoT, these are two Google Cloud Platform products, PubSub and Internet of Things. Reorg is basically when a team at a big company like Google gets reorganized, shuffled internally under new management. So just make sure to keep up with all the words and acronyms that he uses. With that, actually enjoy the interview. All right, James, ready for the questions?
Let's have it.
All right, question number one. Who are you in a few sentences? Background, years of experience, team you were on at Google, etc.
James Cariello. Background is mostly in distributed systems. I was at Google for a decade. Before that was Bloomberg at 6 years, also in messaging, communications, distributed systems. 25 years total, mostly in the realm of networking and leadership.
Very cool. What did you do as a senior engineering leader at Google on a day-to-day basis?
Day-to-day basis is tough because, for all the different teams that I was running, each one required a different level of personal touch. Some were on autopilot and some I was actually playing tech lead. And so it really did vary from one day or one project to the next.
Any details you can share? Like, for example, what does it mean to be a tech lead?
So I was in infrastructure, so technical infrastructure, which then became GCP, or GCP became a part of technical infrastructure at Google. And prior to GCP, I was basically wearing the product manager hat in addition to the engineering leader hat. So thinking about what the needs are of the other engineers at Google and how to make the products like PubSub, for example, meet those needs.
Okay, I see. And interacting mostly with senior engineers, low level or entry level engineers?
No, most of the people I interacted with were L6 to L8 or director level.
Okay.
Yeah, thinking about the needs for their team or their org, because it was mostly on the strategic side rather than the day-to-day, how do we add this one feature here or there.
Gotcha. What's a common characteristic that high performers on your team have or had?
One of it's somewhat cliche, but deriving order out of chaos is a big one. Finding a way to just cut through it with laser-like focus and precision to get to an outcome. It may not be the best outcome, but you can agree it's the best possible outcome given certain sets of constraints or criteria that are hopefully been agreed on at the project outset. Or someone who knows when to ask, like, hey, I'm not sure which path to go, rather than me have to find out later they just chose one and it was not the right one.
Okay, interesting. What's the toughest challenge that you've had while at Google?
Honestly, the reorgs made things tough. When things were moving around, you'd get a few moves away from checkmate on some particular thing. And then now this is your focus. And you're like, just let me finish something, right? Or handing things off. On a more technical side, I would say a lot of the challenges really just come around getting to the essence of what someone is actually seeking, right? The whole problem of you've given me something of what I've asked for, but it's not what I wanted is the anti-pattern that I seek to avoid.
Can you give one example of that concretely?
Sure. I mean, as it relates to PubSub, for example, right? And we talk about what is perfect end-to-end ordering, right? And how does that work? How do you even ensure that you only publish once? If your publisher starts and stops again, is the PubSub system supposed to reject it? Or is it good enough to say, like, if there are multiple publishers putting things on the bus, as long as they're in perfect order based on some synchronized world clock or whatever, that's good enough? And what does that mean in terms of consumption? Like, if there's a load balance fan out in terms of number of consumers, like, is there any particular preference at which point, they're consuming those messages? And so there's so much nuance in, like, what does it mean to have FIFO? For something as simple as, I just put it in and I pull it out. Well, sure, if there's one actor here and one actor there and one bus in the middle, then you get a default tolerance, and would you rather have no delivery at all rather than out of order delivery and just have a giant brownout? Like, it gets really interesting.
Okay, so you seem very passionate when you talk about all these things that you did at Google, especially these concrete examples. So what did you love the most about your role?
Honestly, the scale at which we were operating meant that we were solving problems in new and interesting ways, or taking problems that had been solved previously and trying to apply them in ways that didn't quite fit, or trying to cobble together different approaches. You definitely felt like you were on the edge of something. Not all of Google infrastructure is new. There is a lot of technical debt and craft, like just any company that's been around this long has that. But in general, you did feel like you were exhausting certain things. I would say one of the most fun things I happened to work on was proving to some of the creators of TCP why the performance of TCP, given the various congestion control algorithms, was wholly insufficient for private networks. That, like, you could literally draw an upper bound in terms of how much you could get through a given TCP channel. And we could prove that because we had admission control on the network, that we could just use multiple TCP connections and then reorder it on the other end. That clearly something is wrong here. And that ultimately led to a separate project to enable better performance.
I see. Your passion about engineering and the roles that you had at Google is very contagious. But so now I'm curious to hear, conversely, what did you hate the most about the role? Was it the reorgs?
Yeah, I mean, the reorgs, or just the red tape. I understand that, as a company is growing and you're trying to have standards, whether that's, everything in GCP must look and act a certain way, it just starts creating more and more hurdles and friction to get things done. And then couple that with reorgs because of rapidly expanding teams or changing priorities, like, it suddenly just feels like, oh man, like, just when I finally start to hit my groove, like, now I get broadsided from something else.
Right, which can definitely be very annoying when you're experiencing it.
Yeah, the first few times, but then it gets demotivating, like the third, the fourth, the fifth time, right?
Right. But so then what kept your attention at Google for so long? How was Google able to retain you for 10 years?
There were a lot of problems. There were a lot of challenges. And I was in a fair number of different areas, right? PubSub, load balancing at L3, L4, DNS, both on the resolving side as well as the zones, IoT, ways, like, they're just, part of the reorgs, I guess, were working to my benefit in some sense, of giving me exposure to, lots of fun stuff to sink my teeth into.
I see. So after 10 years at Google, do you feel like you were still learning on a day-to-day basis? Because right now it sounds like you were. Or did it start to really have diminishing returns?
Look, I think you could learn something every day in any particular capacity, right? Like, there's always something, whether it's learning about people, learning about yourself, learning about the environment, right? And so there was definitely still more of that, particularly as I tried to figure out how to scale my leadership style and approach. But I guess I'd characterize it like it felt like I was towing an anchor, and the anchor was getting heavier and heavier the larger the company grew.
I see. And so I guess this brings us to the question of the hour. Why did you leave Google after 10 years? And was it a tough decision? Did you know that you were going to leave at that point?
I would say it was a 3 strikes you're out kind of a thing. There were a couple of things that happened that weren't so great. I was trying in a couple of new different areas. And then at the end of the day, I'm like, you know what? Like, maybe it's just because I'm an agent of change and I wanted to actually make things better, and I'm not content just looking out for myself or, just maximizing my own personal space. I wanted to do great for the team or the product or the technology. And so I think I just got tired. And, 10 years was a good run. I mean, I certainly have beloved memories of my time there. But at the end of the day, it was time to challenge myself in a new and different direction.
So speaking of these beloved memories, do you have a single best moment that you might care to share with us?
Look, Cloud PubSub was started and launched under my watch. Cloud IoT was started and launched under my watch. We survived a bunch of DDoS attacks via our open resolver 8.8.8.8. And like I said, material improvements to TCP/IP performance were or because of the work of my team and I. And so, those things all collectively, like, I'm not sure I could pick a favorite one, like pick a favorite child of yours if you have children.
Right.
There were a lot of highlights. It's just at the end of the day, I think the lowlights in terms of the tar pit that I was slogging through to try to get things done ultimately got the best of me.
I see. So then perhaps we already know the answer. I would guess the answer is yes, but if you could go back 10 years with the knowledge that you have now, would you do it all over again at Google? Would you want to relearn everything that you learned there?
I don't have any regrets about my time at Google. I would gladly, 10 out of 10 would do it again.
And what would you have done if you hadn't gotten into Google or any other big tech company that's comparable to Google?
I think, the experience I had at Google was really informative in terms of the sheer scale. And so whether you need to be at a big company or working on a big problem, it was nice to have that level of exposure, especially for someone who is a distributed systems person like myself. It's hard to say. It was definitely the right place, the right time, the right opportunity, and it worked out well. And in fact, even just rethinking your question, I'd say my biggest regret was I should have never walked away from some of the core things I was passionate about. Because when a reorg happens and they're like, hey, we could really use your help over here, but if you want, you can stay and keep doing, half of what you were doing before. And of course, this is where you need me. I'm going to go to the new challenge and do this. And it's still within infrastructure and it's still within Google. And how bad could it be? And it's not that it would be bad necessarily, but if your passions are somewhere and you're trying to get something done, make sure you understand your success criteria as to why you choose one thing versus another, because it might be that what you're over-indexing on is particularly myopic.
I see. So really seems like you're saying seek out big problems. You happen to have this perfect place, perfect problem, perfect system at Google at the time, but ultimately seek out big problems and make sure to stay true to what you're passionate about.
Especially that last part. Right? Because you can potentially not have large problems around you, but how do you apply your passions in a way that have large impact, even if the problems themselves aren't that large? Yeah.
So then did your intellectual curiosity, interests, did they change over the 10 years that you were at Google? Did your role at Google fully satisfy this passion that you have for networking, infrastructure, big engineering problems?
It's a really interesting question. I think the nature of my curiosity changed as I moved from trying to figure out how to scale past my 2 hands on a keyboard, right? And then 5 hands on a keyboard, or 5 pairs of hands on a keyboard, right? And how large can the org get while I can still remain technical, while I can still understand the details? Or at what threshold can I focus on the big picture and the interactions of how they all come together and not necessarily sweat the small stuff? So walls and doors is something I talk about a lot wherever I go, which is, don't necessarily worry about what's in the room, just focus on where the walls are and where the doors are. And you can always replace the contents of the room later. And this is interface design, microservices, mesh, whatever it may be.
Okay. But so speaking of this idea of scaling beyond, what your 2 hands on a keyboard can do, and even beyond the technical aspect of things, because, you're talking about microservices and all that, that's the engineering side of things. But at the interpersonal level, so you've got big engineering teams, how do these scale? How do these get managed at a company like Google under your leadership?
So I will say that for those of you watching this who aspire to work at Google one day, everyone's journey is going to be very different. Different pockets of Google behave very differently in terms of whether that's the relationship to SRE, the number of SWEs to SRE, just as a just random concrete example, right? Something like storage SRE might have more SREs than SWEs, whereas SRE in docs, there might be 50 to 1, SWEs to 1 SRE, and that affects who's on call, how it works. Is it more of an advisory role? And so I'm just picking on this one, niche aspect of the job, which is who's minding the store, who's writing the features versus who's writing for operational scale. But all of these little things, when put together, materially affect your role, your experience, your life, even beyond any particular managerial style.
So interesting. It really seems like ultimately your experience, even at the same big tech company, can differ drastically. Whether you're a SWE, whether you're a manager, whether you're a senior leader like you, it really can differ a lot.
Absolutely. Mostly by product area, but then even specifically within a given product area.
Yeah. So I guess this brings us to this next question of the hour, which is, what are you doing now?
So I left Google, took some time off during the pandemic, and then, part of my frustration was I wanted to have more of a connection, more of an impact on what my work was going into. And I happened to find this amazing startup called Gro Intelligence, and we're solving for food security and climate change as a data and insights platform.
Can you tell us more about that? Because that's like, the one-line sentence about the company, but I'm sure that most people have no true idea what that means. So tell us about Gro. What is Gro? Why Gro?
So two female co-founders from Ethiopia, the CEO, the COO, both like seeking to meaningfully address food security in Africa. Quickly realizing, both coming from a financial background, it's a global economy, so you need to think on a much bigger scale, a big picture, consider the whole earth. And then what are the insights that need to go into figuring out what grows where, what will grow where, how does climate change affect what is currently growing and where, how does this affect sovereign nations that are trying to figure out how to feed their people, for Fortune 500 companies that are trying to put product on the shelf. So it's not like they're selling to farmers, it's the high level aggregators, the ones who have data scientists who want to mine the data and figure out like, where we're currently growing cocoa beans is not going to be suitable 20, 50 years from now. Like, we need to think about plan B. And, climate change is certainly not great, but, it can be mitigated in some sense with the right amount of planning to figure out like, okay, if it's getting warmer here and it's getting cooler here, now it's just a question of like flipping the script a little bit about like, look at the wine regions in France, for example, like, it's moving north almost outside of the country. Like, okay, there's an opportunity to grow something else, right? And make sure that everyone gets fed, or like the products that we know and love can make their way onto the shelf. And so we have like ex-NASA, USGS, climatologists, agronomic folks, like just this incredible brain trust of people, machine learning, modeling, and then building the data platform, which thankfully have plenty of experience at Google building things at scale to serve all of this massive amount of data that we pull in and aggregate and map to our ontology and then serve back so people can derive insights from it.
You see, this is what I love about entrepreneurship and software engineering. It's that there is a need for entrepreneurship and software engineering in every corner of life. Like, before this call, before you and I spoke, I would have never guessed that like everything that you described about Gro Intelligence is a thing that is needed. It's just not something that my life is, a part of. But it totally makes sense hearing your explanation. And all that to say, even in a market downturn, when a lot of companies are experiencing hardship, there are a lot of other companies that are in need of software engineers, in need of creative problem solvers. So I guess this brings me to the last question about Gro, which is, are you hiring right now?
We are absolutely hiring. So if you're watching this and you're particularly motivated by the mission, if you have a passion for data, scaling things out, definitely hit me up, or hit up Clement, and you can get us in touch.
Yes, I will put all the information about Gro and about James's LinkedIn in the description and in the comments below. On a final point, James, 2 last questions, kind of looking back at your entire career. Number 1, what is the biggest mistake of your career?
If you think about the mistake from where I departed from my passion, in the interest of thinking I was doing my career a service, right? I should have never have walked away from PubSub when I was working on it to pursue a different project. And at the time, I was given very good advice. It was, look at the area you're leaving and what it would look like if you weren't there. You built a strong team. You've been there for a while. Like this can run. They can follow from where you started. And look at what it would look like if you didn't go to this other opportunity and pursue it. Like, how would it potentially fall apart? You had just started, and for context, I was managing 2 areas and it split, and I had to choose between the 2. And so they're like, go with where you're going to have the most impact. Go where they need you the most. Go where it's most fragile and make this huge impact. When in reality, that's true. But if my heart was in the thing that I had been spending all this time and energy on thinking about, regardless of whether it would have gotten me, a promotion or more notoriety or whatever, I should have stayed with where my heart was. And I should have listened to what was tugging at me at the time when I walked away. There were a couple of projects that I started. There were some white papers in the works, some new and novel ways of addressing certain distributed systems patterns that I was really passionate about. And they kind of just died on the vine after I wasn't there. And that, I really, truly regret that.
See, if I would give any advice to people listening, and even to myself, to be honest, it's to really internalize the words that you're speaking right now and try to apply them or map them to my own career and decisions, or your own career and decisions, you the listener. Because I think it's very, very important advice that you're giving here. A very important lesson to be learned from mistakes. Now, the second question on a lighter note is, what's the most important thing that you've taught yourself over your career?
Be true to yourself, and remember that the ultimate currency you have, the one thing that adds your specific brand of value to something, is your integrity. Never sell that, never lose sight of that. Be who you are, and at some point, your reputation, the chips will fall where they may, it will all work out. It may not feel like it at the time. We've all been in difficult situations, but never stop being true to yourself or true to anyone else.
I love it. If that isn't a hyper motivating note to end on, I don't know what is. James, thank you so much for the questions and for the answers. I hope that all of you enjoyed the video. Like I said, I'm going to put James's description or information in the comments below and in the description below. Don't forget to smash the like button if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Share the video with other people. Follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter if you enjoy short form written content. Instagram if you like pictures. And I will see you in the next video. James, say goodbye.
Take care. Gro Intelligence, we're hiring.